Ooh. Okie dokie then. The Oracle of Delphi.
Here, visitor, and welcome to this sacred site. Delphi is an amazing place to visit if you're looking for information. I've come here on several occasions in search of answers to some particularly puzzling questions. And sometimes, I even found them. This is Delphi, home of the renowned oracle. Greeks considered it the navel of the world. Pilgrims and kings journeyed here from all over Greece and beyond, seeking advice from Apollo through the voice of his interpreter, Pythia. During your visit, you will experience the sanctuary through a pilgrim's eye and discover how important oracles and prophecies were to the people of Greece. Now, go off and begin your pilgrimage. I will be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
Okie dokie then.
On their journey to the Temple of Apollo, pilgrims walked this sacred path up Mount Parnassus. The summer sun beat down hot on their backs. Along the way, they took in the magnificent monuments, treasuries, and statues that adorned the road. These landmarks were tokens of people's reverence for the oracle's benevolence. All were dedicated to Apollo, and most were offered by cities to commemorate military victories. The monuments represented not only their donors' piety, but also their power and wealth. The sanctity of Delphi has endured to the present day, and visitors still take this very same route.
The city of Argos dedicated several monuments to Delphi, including the monument of Epigones. The statues depicted the leaders of the mythological expedition against Thebes. This expedition, further explored in one of Aeschylus' tragedies, revolved around the sons of Oedipus, Eteocles and Polynices. Originally, the two had agreed to rule Thebes on alternating years, but conflict arose when Eteocles refused to give up power to his brother. With the help of Adrastos, the king of Argos, Polynices put together a group of 7 attackers to reclaim the city. The monument of Epigones served as a tribute to Greek soldiers willing to fight and die for what was theirs. Ancient Greek treasuries were small temple-like buildings that housed offerings to the gods. They resembled a vestibule with 2 columns in front. The Sicyonian treasury dates back to the end of the 6th century. It was constructed upon the remains of an older structure and incorporated pieces from buildings erected during the reign of the tyrant Cleisthenes. The Sicyonians dismantled said buildings after Cleisthenes' death and reused their pieces in the treasury to mark the beginning of a new era in Sicyonian politics. The Athenians dedicated this treasury to Apollo between 490 to 485, following their victory over the Persians at Marathon. Built with marble from Paros, the treasury was ornamented with 30 metopes depicting the exploits of Heracles and Theseus. Today is the best preserved monument in Delphi, thanks to restoration efforts by French archaeologists between the years 1903 and 1906.
One of the most impressive dedications to Apollo came from the Cnidians, a Greek population that colonized the island of Lipari, north of Sicily. The story behind this dedication is notable. The Cnidians were at war with the Etruscans in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Seeking a good omen, the Cnidians consulted the oracle, and following her advice, they successfully captured 20 enemy ships. To thank Apollo, they offered the god the same number of statues as ships seized.
Well, that was nice of them. Built between 600 and 550, the Bouleuterion of Delphi is one of the oldest monuments in the sanctuary. The building was the seat of the Boule, a council that handled judicial and financial matters. The council was composed of randomly appointed citizens, all of whom usually served as a one-year term. In Delphi, a total of 30 Bouletes were appointed during a year, with 15 chosen every 6 months. Today, the building is in poor condition, but has been identified based on texts and inscriptions discovered in its proximity, including 2 accounts from this council itself.
Next to the Naxian Sphinx stood a simple structure to display offerings from the Athenians, most of which were spoils of war. In particular, these offerings, called ex-votos, were prows of sunken Persian ships. The Athenians built the portico after their naval victory over the Persians in 478 BCE.
A Sibyl was a prophetess. Legends say there were 10 Sibyls in the ancient world, with each one located at different sacred sites. One Sibyl even called Delphi her home long before the appearance of the Pythia, and allegedly delivered her prophecies from atop a stone. Interesting. Naxian Sphinx. Oedipus was son of Laios and Iocasta of Thebes. His father was terrified of a prophecy from Delphi depicting that Oedipus would end up killing him and marrying his wife, so he banished his newborn to the mountains to die. The baby was saved by a shepherd, who gave him to King Polybus and Queen Merope of Corinth to raise him as their own. As he grew, Oedipus heard of the Delphic prophecy, and believing that it was related to Polybus and Merope, fled Corinth and directed himself to Thebes. Laios had died by then, killed by Oedipus, who did not yet know the king was his father, and the city was at the mercy of a monster, the Sphinx, with a human head and a body of a lion. She consumed those who couldn't solve her riddle. Which creature has one voice and yet becomes 4-footed and two-footed and 3-footed? It was Oedipus who replied that the creature was man. They crawl on all fours as a baby, walk with 2 feet as they age, and use a cane for support when they grow old. Oedipus solved the riddle, and the defeated Sphinx either fell from a high rock or ate herself and perished, depending on the legend. Oedipus became king of Thebes and married none other than Iocasta, his mother. He unknowingly fulfilled the prophecy and became one of the most tragic figures in Greek mythology. That's screwed up.
Τραγωδία ανέρεσης εστί. Εστί μιασμός. Λιθιό.
The Apollo of Salamis stood in front of the Temple of Apollo and was dedicated to Delphi upon Themistocles' famous naval victory at Salamis in 480. The bronze statue was 6 meters tall and held a falstone, a ship's stern ornament, in its hand as a symbol of the battle. I don't want to look up at him.
Once arriving before the temple, pilgrims wishing to consult the oracle had to first pay a tax. This tax gave them the initial right to approach the altar of Apollo and make an animal sacrifice to the god. But before proceeding to the Pythia, the preliminary ritual had to succeed. If the animal reacted favorably and showed signs of acceptance to the god, it was sacrificed, and the pilgrim would be allowed to enter the temple to question the Pythia.
And yet Alexios, I don't think, did any of this in the game.
At last we arrive at the Temple of Apollo, where the oracle relayed her prophecies. The temple was the final destination of those seeking an audience with the Pythia, and its appearance matched the majesty of its purpose. Atop its imposing columns, the structure's pediments displayed famous mythological scenes, sculpted by the renowned Greek artist Antenor. But as grand as the temple looked from the outside, it paled in comparison with what happened within.
Before we go in, let's go get these little bits first. Tripods were pieces of furniture used during offerings and rituals. They were not associated with the god Apollo. They were most associated with the god Apollo, and the Pythia sat on a sacred Delphic tripod which delivered her prophecies. The golden tripod of Plataea was dedicated after victory over the Persians at Plataea in 479. The tripod rested atop a twisted 8-meter-tall bronze column that ended in snake heads. The column stood in Delphi until 324 CE, when the Roman Emperor Constantine relocated it to what is now known as Istanbul. Next to the tripod was the bronze palm tree of Eurymedon, which was dedicated by Athenians after Chimon's defeat of the Persians at the Eurymedon River. Built by the Cnidians between 475 and 450, the Lesche was a clubhouse renowned for displaying two paintings by Polygnotos of Thassos, one of ancient Greece's most famous artists. According to Pausanias, the paintings depicted the capture of Troy and a Nekia, necromantic ritual, respectively. The Lesche was most likely constructed after the Battle of Eurymedon in 467, which resulted in Cnidos' liberation from the Persians. The Theater of Delphi was situated above the Temple of Apollo. It offered an expansive view of sanctuary and the valley below, and could accommodate around 5,000 spectators in its seats. The theater hosted different artistic contests, especially during competitions like the Pythian Games. These contests included plays, poetry readings, and musical performances, as were held not only for the audience, but also for Apollo, the god of arts, among other things.
των βαθμίδων. Τι συνεκτιμήσετε όντως το απροσδόκητο που περνά.
Prophecies were given in the most restricted part of the temple, the Aditon, by a chaste woman known as the Pythia. Before delivering prophecies, she first purified herself with water, then burned laurel leaves and barley flour to begin the ritual. Finally, while seated on a tripod surrounded by offerings, the Pythia delivered Apollo's messages. Her words were often strange and indecipherable, and required further interpretation by the temple's priests. Despite much research, the exact causes of the oracle's behavior while prophesying are debated to this day. Myths say that while searching for an oracle who could impart their words to mortals, Apollo established a sanctuary on Mount Parnassus. Apollo took over this site by slaying its sinister guardian, the snake-like Python.
Επικαλούμε σε Μάκαρ πολιόνι με περίπολε και τελετάρχα, Θεόν Πάτερ ιδέ και ιέ, σκυπτούχε, κούρε, δημάτορ, πατριόκοσμε, οδηγέ των κομμών, ελθέ, Μάκαρ, μίστησε, βρίον και χαρημένος αΐ.
Θεόν Πάτερ ιδέ και ιέ, σκυπτούχε, κούρε,
Your visit is complete. I hope you now understand how important this sanctuary was, and how it affected the lives of people both in the Greek world and beyond its borders. To be honest, I could speak about Delphi all day. But what would you like to do now? Ah, you wish to test your knowledge. Let's begin with a simple question. What did the oracle use to purify herself before her predictions? Correct. The oracle used water for purification. Time for another question. Which god was believed to speak through the oracle at Delphi? Yes, the oracle allegedly spoke the words of Apollo, which were then interpreted by priests. One final question for you. Delphi is situated on which mountain? Correct. Delphi stood on the slope of Mount Parnassus. Well done, traveler. Your knowledge rivals that of the wisest philosophers. Of course. Follow me.
Okay, where are we at now? Ooh. Kinda wanna just go over here and do this. Get this out of the way. Is there a boat I can take? Any boat? I'll be back. Screw it, I'm swimming. Battle of Salamis took place in 480 and ended in a stunning victory for the Greeks. The battle marked the beginning of the end of the Second Persian invasion. After the Greek loss at the Battle of Thermopylae, central Greece was open to invasion by King Xerxes and his Persian forces. Xerxes was closer than ever to the vengeance he sought for the humiliations his father Darius suffered during the first Persian invasion of Greece. However, the city of Athens was much stronger than it had been during Darius's time. Rich with resources from the Laurian silver mines, the city used its considerable funds to finance its military effort, with the general Themistocles ordering the construction of 200 triremes. The Athenian strength was bolstered by their coordination with other Greek cities. At Salamis, the Greeks faced their enemy together. The battle itself occurred at sea, in a small closed bay west of Athens. It was hard fought on both sides, but in the end, the Persians suffered far more casualties than the Greeks. This temple was located on the island's north side facing Attica. The shrine hosted a great feast each year in honor of Athena, the protector of Salamis' farmers and sailors. Sploosh. Let's go. Following the Greco-Persian Wars, Themistocles recommended that Athens fortify both the city and the port of Piraeus. The fortifications started under Themistocles and were further strengthened by Pericles and Cimon. Their efforts contributed to the creation of the so-called Long Walls that ensured Athens always had access to its port, even in times of war. Ship sheds were used to store ancient vessels called triremes. The sheds were essential, as triremes required methodical overhauling during the winter months when there was little to no naval navigation. The early sheds were built in the time of Themistocles, and Pericles later built more sheds for the sum of 1,000 talents. The sheds were originally made of wood before transitioning to stone in the 4th century. Get this bit. We'll make our way back to the tour. Don't worry. Sorry, I had to check on my dog. The Themistoclean walls were built out of slabs of stone connected by iron bolts and fixed with molded lead. Thucydides noted that it was easy to see that they were built in a hurry in the face of Spartan opposition. The long walls were meant to protect Athens in a different manner than the regular wall of the time. Since they connected the city with its two main harbors, they isolated Athens from the mainland and, as long as she had a navy, the most powerful one in the entire Greek world, it was technically impossible to starve Athens into submission. The very existence of these walls made possible the whole strategy of Pericles during the Peloponnesian War, which was to endure the Spartan invasions in the territory and to launch counterattacks by landing troops whenever Sparta and her allies were vulnerable, gradually weakening them. The walls were about 6 kilometers long, and they were enforced with towers and ditches. Come on. During the Peloponnesian War, Pericles' strategy was to avoid land combat with the Spartans in favor of taking advantage of Athens' naval supremacy. He also recommended that the population of Attica leave their houses and take refuge within Athens' walls. The latter action ended up vastly increasing the city's population. Many of the refugees ended up camping in Piraeus, which became crowded as a result. Within the same year, a plague began spreading through Piraeus. Due to the dense population, the epidemic quickly spread to Athens, killing approximately 25% of the population, including Pericles himself. In the 5th century, the great statesman Pericles invited Cephalos of Syracuse, father of the orator Lysias, to Athens, where he wished him to open a weapons workshop. Cephalos accepted and settled in the Piraeus, the city's harbor. His workshop revolved around the production of shields and was particularly extensive. It is said that as many as 120 slaves worked there. In comparison, the father Demosthenes, another Athenian orator, owned a sword-making workshop that employed 30 or so slaves, but brought in 3,000 drachmae a year, with the wages of a skilled worker being 1 drachmae a day. Yet another illustrious Athenian, Sophocles, was born to a wealthy manufacturer of armor. Unfortunately, we have little information on these large or small workshops, which were probably numerous in ancient Greece. Yeah, I probably should have just walked around. Oh well. Temple of Asclepios. Sanctuary of the healing god, whose cult was introduced to Athens in the 5th century. Construction was funded by a wealthy Athenian named Telemachos.
Μάλλον το εμαυτό λέγω φεύγει. Μάλλον αυτό πίστη. Λέγονε με αυτό.
In addition to being a trading center, Piraeus also functioned as an industrial center that contained several factories, many of which manufactured weapons during the Peloponnesian War. The former slave Passion owned a shield factory, as did the brothers Lysias and Polemarchos. The orator Demosthenes, meanwhile, owned a factory that produced swords. These factories all employed a large number of slaves and were extremely lucrative for their owners.
Κινηθείτε ευθέως εκείσε, ουκ ημωγέ, ουδείς ημών το σούτο ισχνός, ουδείς το σούτο ο δύναμος εστί, έκαστος εφό ετάχθη. Κίνης αυτόν, ου μέλη μυθίνος πατρός πέθηκας, μη δεις ο κνηρός ένθα. Τι, αναμένεις παρεμού να ποιήσω τόσων κόπων? Πυθίκον συμμορία ικανοτέρα εστί αν εργάζεστε. Αγωγιστήτη.
Sometimes it's probably good just to take a moment to just stop and just look. All the idle animations that they do. Maritime trade was a risky business, and not every ship reached its destination. For example, a merchant ship was wrecked near Kyrenia in the 4th century, and underwater excavations of its remains have revealed much information about ancient Greek shipbuilding. The wreck's wooden hull was made of pine, and suggests the ship was made using the shell-first technique, whereas the shell of the boat was constructed before the rest of its parts. The ship's cargo included jars filled with almonds and over 400 wine amphoras. It's also carried 29 millstones that were used as ballast to stabilize the vessel, and 300 lead net weights that were likely used for fishing. We're getting there, people. I know it's a long and slow one, but we're getting there. Originally, ports used fire to help guide ship navigators to land. The innovation of placing fire on top of a platform led to the development of the lighthouse. Ancient lighthouses started appearing in the Archaic period, around the 6th to 5th century BCE. The island of Thasos had 3 marble lighthouses that took the shape of a small circular tower placed on promontories. One of the most famous lighthouses was the Pharos of Alexandria, which stood at a height of over 100 meters. We've actually visited that in Origins. The Athenian banner was inspired by the coinage of Athens in the 5th century. These coins show the main goddess of the city, Athena, on one side, and an owl on the reverse. Athena had several known attributes, but was mainly associated with warfare, handicraft, and wisdom. She was the patron of Athens, to which she gave her name. The owl of Athena symbolized the goddess's wisdom and protection. It was often depicted beside her in iconography. These Athenian coins were so emblematic that they were called the glaucas, owls, in antiquity. Maritime trade was essential for Greek cities, and certain products could only be acquired from overseas. Large-scale trade occurred in the Emporium. Greeks conducted business among themselves, but also with other places like Egypt. Traded goods included grapes, olives, wine amphoras, grain, wood, metal ore, textiles, and slaves. Now let's begin the tour.
Greetings, wanderer, and welcome to the port of Piraeus. Piraeus is one of the busiest, most important ports in the Greek world. Money flows through here like a river that runs all the way to Athens. Acting as a port for Athens, Piraeus welcomed merchants, goods, and travelers from all over the world. It was a central part of Athens' economy, but it was also fortified enough to protect the city's considerable fleet. When you finish exploring the port, find me, and we will talk further.
Piraeus, a peninsula southwest of Athens, became the city's main port after the politician Themistocles encouraged the development of its natural harbors. These developments led to the gradual abandonment of the older harbor of Phaleron. Piraeus's fortifications were further developed by Cimon and Pericles, along with the long walls which ensured goods could still be moved during sieges. Piraeus was divided into three main sectors: the military port, the Emporion, and the residential area. By the 5th century BCE, it had become not only Athens' naval headquarters, but also the mercantile center of the Mediterranean. Piraeus's development during the 5th century BCE attracted a large population. Many craftsmen, merchants, bankers, sailors, and ship owners moved to the port in great numbers. The population was a mix of Greek citizens, foreign visitors, and immigrants, known as metics. The variety of the port's inhabitants gave Piraeus a cosmopolitan atmosphere. Most of the residents were involved in trade, but others worked on shipbuilding or in larger-scale industries like shield factories. Piraeus's commercial focus offered many opportunities for those seeking to increase their wealth and status. One such rags-to-riches tale is that of Passion, a slave who eventually became a citizen and earned a fortune thanks to his bank and his shield factory.
Βοημός εξάδελφος και μεθόμος στα μάτια. Αενάω.
Piraeus was a demi, or district, of Attica. Because of its size, function, and varied population, it had a much more complicated administrative structure than other demes. Above all, Piraeus was closely monitored and controlled by the Athenian assembly due to its importance to the city. Within the port, there were two separate categories of trade: international trade, which took place in the Emporion, and retail trade, which was managed by Kapoloi in Piraeus's agora. The Emporion was a commercial port dedicated to trading goods from overseas. All international transactions were required to be made within its limits and needed to be exclusively wholesale. Elected magistrates managed all business and laws in the port. Meanwhile, port authorities known as epimeletes oversaw trade and took care of the regulation of prices. This was an especially crucial duty, as the amount of supplies and goods could fluctuate wildly based on factors like bad harvests or lost cargo. Common products sold in the Emporion included vegetables, fruits, fish, leather, timber, marble, metal, weapons, and ceramics. According to Hermippos, Athens was also wealthy enough to afford the finest goods from all over the world, including figs from Rhodes, almonds from Thassos, oil from Samos, and wine from Chios. Taxes were collected on all merchandise that came into the Emporion, which provided Athens with a major source of income. After arriving in the Emporion, merchants set up samples of their goods in a display area called the Deigma. This was where citizens and foreigners gathered to officially make their deals, and almost all merchandise that came into the Emporion was traded within the area. The Deigma was under constant supervision by magistrates, who negotiated price control with the importers. They would occasionally give special privileges to those who agreed to sell at lower prices. These privileges ranged from tax exemptions to specially reserved seating in the theater. Piraeus was a deme, and as such was supervised by a magistrate called the Demarchos. While most demarchoi were chosen locally within their deme, Piraeus was appointed directly by Athens, so the city could better monitor its commercial interests. In fact, matters regarding the Emporion, the military harbor, and the grain trade were regularly debated and decided by the Athenian assembly. Transactions within the Piraeus were supervised by metronomoi. These were magistrates responsible for keeping track of weights and measures. They made sure merchants' measurements were always accurate to prevent bad deals and scams. Even though Piraeus would eventually develop into a city in its own right, it always remained under the control of Athens. A commercial tax of 2%, or a pentecost, was placed on all cargo entering and leaving Piraeus. The tax was collected by a group of 5 people called Pentekostologoi. According to Andocides, This position could be bought for the hefty sum of 30 talents, or 180,000 drachmae. However, most of these officials made a profit of up to 6 talents, making the job very lucrative. While merchants were responsible for setting the value of their goods, Pentecostologoi had the power to challenge the value, if they saw fit. Furthermore, merchants were required to register with these officials before they could transport, display, and sell their goods. Overall, this system provided Piraeus, and by extension Athens, with a tremendous amount of money. The sale of grain was overseen by special magistrates called Sitophilakes. Since some Greek cities had a grain deficiency and relied heavily on imports, these officials were extremely important. Their duties encompassed all aspects of grain commerce, including price control and profit margins, to ensure Athens remained well-fed. This is no surprise. Grain was so important to Athens that 2/3 of all stocks were required to be transported and sold at the city's agora by law. According to Demosthenes, the significance of the Sitophilakes was such that if they failed in their duties, they faced the death penalty.
Λέξωσε την εμία επικοινία και ως αύριο...
The Emporion operated on a foundation of credit and loans. Overseas commerce was handled by 2 types of tradespeople. Emporoi transported cargo in borrowed ships, while Nauchloroi were ship owners who moved goods on their own vessels. Elsewhere in the Emporion were bankers and accountants who arranged loans and kept track of incoming and outgoing ships. Emporoi and Nauchloroi financed their maritime voyages with these loans, which often had a high interest rate due to the dangers of sea travel. Emporoi used the loans to pay for both the cargo and the right to a ship, while Nauchloroi only had to pay for their crew. Loans and interest were repaid upon a ship's return to port. However, in the event of a catastrophe such as a shipwreck, the merchant and ship owner were released from their obligations, and the losses were transferred to the lender.
You've returned. I hope you enjoyed your stroll through the port. Piraeus was important to Athens' commercial interests, but it eventually came into its own as a vibrant and bustling port. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. If you say so, let us see what you've learned, wanderer. First, a simple question. Which Athenian politician originally encouraged the development of Piraeus' natural harbors? Correct. Themistocles saw Piraeus' potential as a port and encouraged its development. On to the next question. What did the Sitophilakes supervise? It was metronomi who were in charge of Piraeus' weights and measures. Try again. Yes, Sitophilakes had the extremely important responsibility of handling all matters related to grain commerce. Only one question left. What was the name of the slave who took advantage of Piraeus' opportunities to earn themselves citizenship? Correct. Vespasian managed to earn a fortune and achieve citizenship thanks to both his bank and a successful shield business. Your knowledge of Piraeus is impressive. Well done, Wanderer. Of course. Follow me, Wanderer.
Okay, where are we now? Why are some of these blue? Oh man. Okay, it's obvious I'm gonna have to actually go out of my way to get all these discovery sites. Like, I don't think there are even any trophies associated with the Discovery Tour in this. I never discovered Melos? That's weird.
Βαβέ, τούτους τους όνους μαστιγού. Ακαταπαύστος. Το ήρυκα το πατρί σου ότι
The banner of Melos is derived from a coin of the city, depicting the symbol of the Triskeles. The name of the symbol literally means 3 legs. It was sometimes used on coins, but more often on shields. The larger meaning of the symbol is not clear, but an ancient epigram speaks of a Triskeles on a shield that is supposed to frighten opponents. The bearer of the shield supposedly ran very fast. This symbol is still in use today on the Sicilian flag and that of the Isle of Man. Lover's Leap. The 11th and 12th labors of Heracles were tacked on at the end, since Eurystheus didn't recognize Heracles killing the Hydra as a labor because Aeolus helped him. Cleaning the stables was also ignored because Heracles was paid, and it was the rivers that did the actual cleaning work. The 11th labor required Heracles to steal apples from the garden of the Hesperides, the 3 nymphs of the evening. The garden was situated in the west of the world, in northern Africa, and produced golden apples. There, Heracles tricked Atlas into retrieving the apples for him. Although he proposed to hold up the heavens for a while in Atlas' stead, Heracles tricked the Titan and walked away with the fruit himself. Because they're worth it. Come on, Phobos. Oh, it's the Nemean lion. You all know the story. I would hope. Excuse me. You suck. Wood needed. The famous theater of Epidaurus was built on the slope of Mount Kinorsion. It is considered the most perfect theater structure in all of antiquity due to the harmony on its proportions and exceptional acoustics. The auditorium, still virtually intact, was built in the second half of the 4th century BCE. The stage building, however, is in ruins, though its basic arrangement is clear enough. The theater housed musical contests held during the Asclepiae, and records show the Greeks used the building as far back as the late 5th century BCE. The Asclepia was a religious festival that included musical contests and athletic competitions. The musical portion of the festival featured rhapsodists and singers, competing to see who could recite the best epics. The musicians were supervised by the priests of Asclepios, who served as judges. The winner was decided by a jury made up of a priest, the presiding officer, the physicians, and a specially appointed arbiter. The competition stakes were high, and artists who forgot to show up received a considerable fine. The Asclepia was not specific to Epidaurus. There is evidence of the festival occurring in sanctuaries in Aegina, Gortys, Kos, Pergamon, and Tricca. Meanwhile, in Athens, the Asclepia coincided with another festival called the Dionysia. Never skips leg day. The Asclepian Games occurred every 4 years during the Asclepia Festival. They were comprised of artistic and athletic contests, the latter of which took place in a formal stadium. Probably built in the 3rd century BCE, the stadium featured stone seating from which the audience could watch foot races on the racetrack below. Further archaeological excavations have revealed a stone starting line called a balbis, and a starting mechanism called a hisplex, which helped prevent false starts. Interesting. Pilgrims came to Epidaurus from all over Greece. However, the influx of visitors increased dramatically after a plague devastated Athens from 430 to 426. According to Thucydides, people were desperate for health care, and traditional physicians didn't know how to cope with the new disease. These factors led to masses of people making the journey to the sanctuary in the hopes that Asclepios would heal them. Later in 421, the Athenians were able to bring Asclepios to them during a break in the Peloponnesian War. The god arrived in the form of a wooden statue. It was placed, along with a statue of Hygeia, in a sanctuary on the south side of the Acropolis. If a trip to the sanctuary of Asclepios wasn't possible, sick people could seek help from civic doctors. If Herodotus is to be believed, there was already a system of public doctors in place in Aegina and Athens by the late 6th century. Some physicians received a retaining fee to reside in the community and treat citizens. However, the doctors could still receive, or in some cases demand, compensation from their patients. While physicians probably treated the poorest citizens for free, it is unlikely they were willing to do the same for the rich, or for non-citizens.
Δέο με πάυσε και κίνησον στόμα. Αρτηριοτομήσω. Ουχή, καταλγή.
Ow.
Ετρύπησα το ελάχιστον και το αίμα εξέρχεται. Το αυτό και ο αΐρ. Τούτε επιρρυθμίζει την πίεση.
Yeah, wash it off, apply pressure.
Ο βραχίον σου ίσως έστε αδύναμος από λίγον, αλλά χύε το αίμα. Ο αδελφός σου λέγει ότι ο βραχίον σου εστί ειδηματώδης. Εν αγωνιά μη εν λιμότητη. Είδομεν πόσο δύναση κοινήν τούτον. Απολύτως των άλλων διερευνητέων ημίν πότερων, θέρμη εστί η μετάπτωση διαθέσεως. Τούτε εστί καλόν. Λιπτέων μη τους παλμούς σου ή να αισθανθώ του αέρος κίνησιν. Καλώς γέννην ακούομεν την καρδίαν σου. Είπε ο αδελφός ότι διερευνώμη τη συνάφιαν μεταξύ σφυγμού και μουσικής. Χρώμε την είδα.
Also known as the Midday, the sanctuary's Tholos housed the cult of Asclepios. It was the most beautiful building in the sanctuary, and its size and splendor emphasized its importance. An opening in the center of the floor gave access to a circular pit. From there, it was possible to enter the building's foundation, a subterranean maze that may have housed sacred snakes. Snakes were considered to be Asclepios' emblem. As such, whenever the god's cult integrated into a new city, they brought a pack of sacred snakes with them. One medical stele related how a pilgrim was supposedly healed by one of the sanctuary snakes. A man's toe was healed by a snake. He was suffering terribly from a difficult wound on his toe, and during the day was carried outside by servants and was sitting on some seat. When sleep overtook him, a snake came out of the abaton and healed his toe with its tongue. After it had done this, it returned to the abaton. When the man awoke, he was healthy and said that he had seen a vision. A handsome young man seemed to have sprinkled a drug over his toe. After their healing, patients and worshippers of Asclepios would leave an ex voto in the sanctuary as an offering of thanks. The ex voto could be a bandage, crutches, or medical tools, a confession stele describing their experience, or a statuette. Some ex voto were especially extravagant. For example, Hermodicos of Lampsakos was instructed by Asclepios to find the largest stone he could, then leave it in the sanctuary as an offering. Hermodicos did as he was told, and the stone he offered exists to this day, his inscription still on it. In recognition of your power, Asclepios, I dedicate this stone I raised, to prove your art is evident for all to see. Guest houses were built to host patients during their stay at the sanctuary. One such hostel was a monument called the Katagogion. It also hosted Theodokoi. Theodokoi were men of influence who liaisoned with the sanctuary's ambassadors, known as Theori. It was the Theodokoi's duty to donate funds to maintain the sanctuary and to make appearances at religious festivals like the Asclepiae. Pausanias writes that Asclepios' first sanctuary was in Tricca, the Thessalian city-state some mythological accounts name as the god's birthplace. While no archaeological evidence of this temple exists, 4th century BCE coins depicting Asclepios have been found in the area. The remains of the sanctuary in Epidaurus, meanwhile, date back to the 6th century. This makes the site the earliest evidence of the cult of Asclepios. From the 5th century onward, the cult slowly gained popularity, and by the 4th, it had extended across the entire Mediterranean area. The Temple of Asclepios was the main building of the sanctuary. Built around 375 BCE, it replaced an earlier building located further southeast. The temple was constructed over the course of 4 years. According to Pausanias, the interior contained a chryselephantine ivory and gold statue of Asclepios. The statue was made by the sculptor Thrasymedes of Paros and depicted the god sitting on a throne, holding a staff in one hand and a snake's head in the other. A dog rested by Asclepios' side to keep him company. Coming to Asclepios' sanctuary was a process of purification. From a religious perspective, illness was a pollution the gods could help eliminate. Even Hippocratic authors recommended visits to the sanctuary, especially when the only alternative was a bad or inexperienced healer. Pilgrims visiting the sanctuary at Epidaurus had to purify themselves before they could enter. Fortunately, there were nearby sacred springs and baths for exactly that purpose. The springs purified the pilgrims spiritually, but they also made them clean, which was another quality needed to visit the sanctuary. The baths of Epidaurus probably had religious and curative uses, and visitors were encouraged to purify their bodies in them before visiting the Abaton. However, the baths were also prescribed to treat different ailments. Ancient Greeks knew the value of a good bath, and Hippocrates himself meticulously classified different bath types according to various ailments and pains. For example, he recommended hot baths to help cure things like lung and kidney disease. No matter what the problem, Hippocrates had a bath for it. Excuse me. Hey, Herodotus, what's up?
Welcome, traveler, to the sanctuary of Asclepios, a place of rest and healing. The sanctuary of Asclepios is an amazing place, even for those with only a passing interest in medicine. It was a fascinating location, combining the mystical, religious, and scientific. And if someone happened to pass out, they'd luckily be surrounded by skilled physicians. This is the sanctuary of Asclepios, the god of medicine. It was here that the sick and weary came, seeking cures for their ailments. Sometimes the medical practitioners provided the cures, and sometimes the healing came from the gods themselves. This tour will help explain the inner workings of the sanctuary, as well as the unique way the Greeks approached medicine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The ill and infirm came to this sanctuary to pray and offer sacrifices to Asclepios, the god of medicine. According to myth, Asclepios was once a mortal physician who eventually became a god. He had many sanctuaries across Greece, but the most famous was in Epidaurus. When pilgrims passed through the entrance of the sanctuary, they could read this inscription: "When you enter the abode of the god which smells of incense, you must be pure, and thought is pure when you think with piety." Medical steles constituted a sort of hub between medicine, religion, and the divine. They were slabs with inscriptions that praised Asclepios' virtues and merit, and described his methods of healing. The inscriptions relayed the dreams patients had within the abaton, one of the most important buildings in the sanctuary. The steles outlined the patient's name, their disease, and how they were cured by Asclepios. They were probably written by the sanctuary's priests, or at least under the priest's supervision. Asclepios was a complex deity. In addition to being a god, he was also a trained physician and disciple of the centaur Chiron. In ancient Greece, religion was inseparable from rites, processions, and sacrifices. This was no different in Epidaurus, and visitors to Asclepios' sanctuary needed to prepare themselves accordingly. Pilgrims cleaned themselves in order to be pure, then offered Asclepios food like honey cakes, cheesecakes, baked meats, and figs. The food was placed on the sanctuary's holy table, where it was presumably later taken by priests. After the preliminary offerings, visitors were allowed to enter the abaton, where they would hopefully encounter Asclepios in a dream. Medical steles also mention that healed patients sometimes gave additional offerings to Asclepios as thanks for being cured. Asclepios was originally born a mortal and was the product of an affair between the god Apollo and a mortal, Coronis. Apollo killed Coronis after discovering she had been unfaithful and ordered her body burned on a funeral pyre. However, he rescued his unborn child from Coronis' womb before the fire consumed her body. Apollo gave the baby to the centaur Chiron, who raised Asclepios and taught him to practice medicine. Over time, Asclepios became so skilled in the art of healing, he could even raise the dead. This angered Zeus, who sent Asclepios to Hades with a thunderbolt. Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes responsible for making Zeus's thunderbolts. Then, Zeus revived Asclepios, making him immortal and deifying him in the process. In sculptures, pottery, mosaics, and coins, Asclepios was portrayed holding a staff intertwined with a sacred snake. The staff is a symbol of medicine that still endures to this day. The Epitateon was the priest's residence. As the link between patients and the gods, priests were essential to the operation of the sanctuary. They were often elected into the priesthood for one-year periods, but could also buy themselves a position if they were wealthy enough. In addition to interpreting patients' dreams in the Abaton, priests both supervised and performed sacrifices and rituals. During these functions, they were usually clad in white. The Abaton was built in the northern boundary of the sanctuary, where it surrounded a sacred well whose water was believed to have therapeutic properties. The Abaton was where pilgrims went for incubation, or dream rituals. Details of the incubation ritual have been described in unearthed medical steles. They were also noted in Aristophanes' play Plutos, which featured a more comedic view of the process. Incubation was the dream ritual pilgrims experienced in the Abaton. After completing the necessary preliminary rituals, pilgrims were allowed to enter the sacred building, where they lay prone. As they took in the smell of burning incense, the sanctuary's priests extinguished the oil lamps and asked them to sleep in silence. Once they were asleep, Asclepios would appear in their dreams and give his medical advice. The advice included diet and treatment recommendations, as well as requests for specific offerings or religious rituals. Upon waking up, priests interpreted the patient's dreams, unless a patient had been miraculously healed in their sleep. However, if a patient was completely beyond help, they were removed from the Abaton. This was to adhere to a ritual law that stated that no one could die or be born within the building.
I see you've completed the tour. I hope you enjoyed your time in the sanctuary. As you can see, gods and miracles were just as important to the healing process as medicine was. Now, what else would you like to do? Excellent. Here is your first question. Which mythical creatures made Zeus's thunderbolts? Correct. Zeus's thunderbolts were crafted by Cyclops. On to the second question. What was the name of the building where incubation occurred? Yes, pilgrims entered the Abaddon to undergo a dream ritual in the hopes of curing their ailments. One final question for you. Who was Asclepios' father? Yes, Apollo was Asclepios' father, and his mother was a mortal named Coronis. You've proven you know the sanctuary inside and out. Well done. Very well. Follow me.
Where to now? Wow, so you had to be married? Jeez. Biscuits were sprinkled with salt during symposiums to stimulate or sustain guests' thirst so they could drink more. Smart. Where are we now? Famous cities completed. Huh. I'll do that in a little bit. Hold on. Despite the luxuriousness of public buildings, the streets of Athens were, for the most part, narrow and tortuous. Nevertheless, efforts were made to improve urban planning, such as in the 5th century, when architect Hippodamos of Miletos created a grid plan of the city with parallel streets and rectangular intersections. Greek cities in the 5th century also became more sanitary thanks to innovations like clean running water and sewers for waste removal. In Athens, streets and public places were placed in the care of special magistrates known as astynomoi, or police officers. The principal duty of these officials was to keep streets and sanctuaries clean, and to organize the efficient disposal of garbage outside the city walls. Oh, come on. I missed the door, didn't I? The Greek household was protected by many gods. Zeus Herkios, or Zeus of the Fence, was worshipped at a courtyard altar and supposedly protected the house from outside aggressors. Zeus of the Property was linked to a house's family and their wealth. He was represented by a two-handed jar wrapped in a white woolen fillet and filled with various seeds, water, and olive oil. Other gods included Hestia, who was the eponymous goddess of the domestic hearth, as well as Hermes and Apollo, who were both mentioned as being guardians of the front door. Representations of Heracles was also known to stand near houses, possibly to protect them from crime and the forces of evil. While Greek houses had windows, they usually looked out onto the central courtyard, as opposed to the outside streets. They were placed either on the first floor or on a high wall so passers-by couldn't peek inside. The windows were small and without glass. They were often made of wood, but could also be simple holes in the walls. Some windows also had massive stone lintels and embrasures. The windows were probably closed by means of wooden shutters, large grills of wood or metal, or stone slabs. Religion was an important aspect of Greek private life. Though the walls of the house provided physical protection, the family needed divine protection as well, and for this they turned to Zeus. Every house had an altar dedicated to Zeus Heraclios of the Fence, that the family could worship at by offering sacrifices and libations in the god's honor. Sacrifices were also performed in the house on special occasions like weddings, births, or for the festival of Zeus Tesios. The Greek dramatist Menander mentioned that worshippers would circle the altar with sacrificial tools like a vessel of holy water. They sprinkled the water around the altar to purify it, then began the sacrifice proper. Household sacrifices could be animals, but also offerings of incense and vegetables. The ceremony of amphidromia celebrated the presentation of a newborn. It might have taken place in the courtyard. The ceremony was held when the baby was 5 days old and symbolized its acceptance into the family. Friends who were invited to the occasion, and the house's exterior was decorated differently depending on the sex of the child. Olive branches indicated a boy, while garlands of wool indicated a girl. The most central part of the amphidromia was the circling the house's hearth with the newborn, followed by the presenting of the child to both the house's gods and the rest of the family. The newborn also received their name during the ceremony. Bedrooms in antiquity were generally small and sparsely furnished. Greek bedrooms usually contained a klein, couch, table, chairs, stools, incense burners, and chests to store clothes and other objects. In general, the amount of furniture corresponded to the wealth of the family, with richer people able to afford more furniture. According to ancient architects, the ideal place for bedrooms was on the western side of the courtyard to catch the morning sun. This explains why most bedroom windows had shutters to keep the light out. Hey, Pericles. Pericles was one of the most influential men in Athenian politics during the second half of the 5th century. Historians even refer to the period he was in power as the Age of Pericles. Athens flourished under Pericles' leadership. With his guiding hand, the Delian League transformed into the Athenian Empire, and all the League's members were made to regularly pay tribute to the city. Because of this new income, Athens was able to erect extravagant monuments on the Acropolis, such as the famous Parthenon. During the Peloponnesian War, Pericles' strategy was to conduct a naval war, preferring to keep himself within the walls of Athens. However, as a consequence of the city's overpopulation, a plague spread through the population and killed many people, including Pericles himself.
Greetings, Wanderer. It is my pleasure to introduce you to a unique tour. One that won't take you to impressive landmarks or famous battle sites, but through a typical Athenian home. If Olympus is Zeus's sanctuary, then my house is my own. It is a place where I can shelter myself from the noise and stress of city life. For an outgoing people like the Greeks, the house was a refuge of privacy. Inside, they could escape from the constant demands of civic life to enjoy the simple pleasures of family life. Look for me when you are done, and we can discuss the things you've seen. Farewell for now.
The house, or oikos, was a residence for Greek families and their slaves. Contrary to modern houses, which look outward, the Greek household was built to look inward on a courtyard. The courtyard was the house's central fixture. It was the building's main source of daylight, and also the location of religious altars dedicated to worship. The building itself was made up of familiar accommodations, including bedrooms, storage rooms, a kitchen, and a living room. Women were generally in charge of tending to the home, which in Greece was called oikonomia, a term that inspired the modern word economy. A pasta was a corridor that connected a house's courtyard to its residential section. Archaeological evidence from the city of Olynthos reveals that pastas were added to Greek home design in the 5th century BCE. Greeks had no qualms about combining their work and their private lives, and many of them worked from home. Artisans like blacksmiths, sculptors, and potters often had workshops in their houses. Some even operated small stores to sell their work. Similarly, doctors were known to treat patients in special offices located in their homes. Women also worked in the house and were responsible for making textiles, as well as producing clothes and supervising weaving, which was carried out by slaves. If the household was wealthy enough, they could even produce a surplus of textiles to sell in times of financial difficulty. The inner courtyard was the nexus of the house. Functionally, it allowed air to circulate and also provided access to most of the rooms. It also sometimes housed a well or a cistern that collected rainwater. In the center of the courtyard was an altar to Zeus Hercules, who served as the protector of the household. Women would often use the space to sew and cook, while children used it as a play area. Furthermore, if the family had pets or animals, the courtyard was where they were allowed to run free. The bathroom was located in the back of the house. Much like today, it was used for cleaning and washing, although the Greeks used chamber pots instead of toilets. Most bathrooms had a luterion that could be filled with water for washing. Mirrors, razors, strigils, and sponges could also be found in the bathroom, along with small vases called arebaloi, which were usually filled with perfume or oil. Greek homes had kitchens where the family's meals were prepared. The Greeks did not often eat meat, except during special occasions like banquets or after sacrifices. They had mainly a grain-based diet, eating staples such as bread, porridge, or a barley cake called maza. They also occasionally ate poultry, fish, and other seafood, as well as fruits, vegetables, goat milk and cheese, and olive oil. Food was cooked on a tripod, or sometimes in a klebanos, which was a sort of mobile oven. Other cooking implements included braziers, mortars and pestles, a spit to hold food over a fire, platters, and frying pans. The family also used the kitchen to store food in containers called pithoi. Symposia were major social institutions in Greece. They were drinking parties held exclusively for men. The party took place in the men's section of the house, the andron. where residents and guests reclined on special couches called clinai. Food was served on low tables set in front of the couches, while wine was placed in a crater in the center of the room. During a symposium, men drank, sang, had philosophical discussions, and played games like kotobos. Musicians, dancers, and even courtesans were often welcomed to attend as well. However, wives and daughters were always excluded. The Pyrgos, or upper stories, was the women's quarter of the house, where they could pursue their activities and observe the city without being seen themselves. The rooftops were also used in a special rite called the Adonia, a private celebration held in honor of Adonis, which was reserved for women. At the beginning of spring, women filled terracotta pots with soil and lettuce seeds, then climbed a ladder to place the pots on the rooftop. These pots served as the women's very own Gardens of Adonis.
I hope you now have a better understanding of the routines and home life of the Greek people. What would you like to do next? Then let's start with a simple question. Which group of people celebrated the Adonia? Correct. The Adonia was celebrated by women of all stations. Let's move on to the next question. Which of the following was known as the protector of the household? No, this particular Zeus was known as Zeus of the Oath. Try again. Yes, Zeus Herkios protected the household, and an altar to the god usually stood in the center of the house's courtyard. On to the final question. Which of the following was not located in the bathroom? I'm afraid mirrors were quite common in bathrooms. Keep trying. The Luterion was a water basin that was located in the bathroom. Try a different answer. Strigils were often found in Greek bathrooms, where they were most likely used to remove sweat before bathing. Try again. Correct. The Klivanos was a mobile oven usually found in the kitchen. It seems you really know your way around Greek homes. Well done, wanderer. As you wish. Come with me.
You know your way around a Greek home. Apparently not the bathroom, though. So where to next? Oh, this should be easy. Let's collect all these first. I'll get you on the way back. The banner of Thassos depicts the head of Heracles, inspired by the area's coinage. Heracles had an important sanctuary in the city and was the hero protector of Thassos. He is shown wearing a lion skin headdress, the scalp of the Nemean lion he killed with his bare hands. The iconography of the coin itself is a precise copy of a relief of the Gate of Heracles, one of the entrances to the city. All gates were decorated by reliefs. There were also a gate of Hermes, a gate of Zeus, and a gate of the Silenos, among others. The gate of Heracles led to the Heraklion, the sanctuary dedicated to him. Euripides' Bacchaea featured the tale of how the god Dionysus introduced the wine to Attica. The story goes that Dionysus found hospitality in the home of Icarios and his daughter Erigone. During his stay, Dionysus showed his mortal host how to cultivate the vine plants and turn their fruit into wine. Later, Icarios gave his wine to some shepherds. Not used to the feeling of drunkenness, the shepherds thought that Icarios had poisoned them and killed him in response. Stricken with grief for the death of her father, Erigone hung herself from the branches of the tree that stood where her father was buried. Darn. You know what? Let's go to Lemnos first. Get this thing, and then we can get all the things for this region. Lemnian wine, from the island of Lemnos, near the land of my birth. Up you go, come on. Created by Nika Rukavinsnikova for each of the 27 regions in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the flags represent the color and iconography of their region. For example, Athens is easily identifiable as the blue banner with the owl symbol. Crete shows the bullhead, and Sparta the rich red with a gold lambda. The flags also denote the export or main industry of that region. A lot of historical research was referenced for their designs, particularly from the coins of the period and region. Ah, so the blue ones mean behind-the-scenes stuff. Cool. How many tours there are in here. Because I've already been going for probably at least 4 hours at this point. Of course, I've also been going around doing all the discovery sites too. Wood needed. Dacian wine was very popular in the Greek world, and it was in such high demand that adulteration and imitation wines became major issues. To combat these issues, a law was established by the citizens and landowners of Thassos that forbid any foreign wine from entering Dacian territory. They also prohibited the selling of wine in jugs or cups, to ensure that wine could only be sold in properly labeled amphoras or pithoi marked with a stamp of authenticity. Below is text from a stele outlining the details of the law. No Thasian ship shall import foreign wine within Athos and Pachia. If it does, the owner shall be liable to the same penalties as for adulterating the wine with water, and the helmsman shall be liable to the same penalty. Nor shall anyone sell wine by the cotil, either from amphoras, or from a cask, or from a false unlabeled pithos. And whoever sells it, the lawsuits and the deposits and the penalties shall be the same as for adulterating it with water. So, Marcos, you're here to tell us about winemaking, huh? Fun. Everybody benefits.